3, 2, 1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the August 22nd Welcome Back to School edition of the Board of Education meeting for the Poudre School District. I hope everybody had a wonderful summer. If you wouldn't mind muting your cell phones as we begin the meeting, that would be greatly appreciated. First up, that was our call to order, and then we have approval of the agenda. Do any board members have any changes that they would like to make for the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, first up we have community comment. Let me grab the list. Well, looks like we have 2 people signed up to speak for community comment tonight. Just as a reminder, the podium on the right here is the podium that we use for community comment. And you have up to 3 minutes. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, there's a light system. The green light is on while you have 3 minutes left to speak, or once you start. The yellow light goes on when you have 30 seconds left, and the red light goes on when I would like you to wrap it up, please, because I really hate interrupting people and asking them to wrap it up. I just don't like doing that. So if you would please abide by the lights, we'd appreciate it. Okay, first up tonight we have Mike Prusnick.
Good evening, Michael Prusnick. I'd like to talk to you about 4 items here tonight. First of all, many government entities are talking about the dangers of wood-burning smoke, including cancer. I'd like you guys to have an open discussion about whether or not we should be canceling bonfires due to the risk it creates to our students and finding an alternative way to celebrate that does not cause and create harm. Number 2, the federal government's current budget is going to cancel the CHP Plus, the Children's Health Care Plan, and that could have interesting impacts on low-income students, and it would be good to see this board have a discussion about the impacts that might have on our students and performance. Number 3, I'd like to thank Director Donovan last time for giving support for the process. I think that's very important, especially in a time when we're seeing a lot of confrontation over extreme party politics. It's important to try to remember to be cooperative even when in our disagreements. And for the last statement, I'd like to ask the board to consider issuing some more fact-based information on what's going on with these lawsuits and stuff. From my perspective, and having sat through several of the court cases, I saw Mr. Sutherland interview some of the witnesses, and we learned that your attorney had directed a staff member to sign a document as a presiding officer, that under oath that person testified that she was not the presiding officer. In a subsequent case, the judge even said that he had problems with that, and if it wasn't for Kipp and Smizer issuing sworn statements that they had verified the petition, you may have lost that lawsuit. From my perspective, Mr. Sutherland discovered problems with the government's handling of the situation and got those things rectified. He should be thanked for that. We should be questioning the integrity of the attorney. We should be doing an audit. We should make sure that they are actually doing their job and spending taxpayer dollars wisely. As far as the talks about how one individual could do this, let's go back to court documents that said very clearly that Superintendent Smizer initiated the lawsuits on her own accord, did not need board approval, and if it wasn't for those lawsuits being initiated, Mr. Sutherland would not have to appeal the ruling. So it's not as easy as some of the stuff that we've been hearing on one side. So let's tell some more of this and get that out there, and let's try to bring this community together. You did win the election by more than 1 vote, and that is a win. Even if it's small, don't discount the victory. But what I would say is it does reflect the community concern in the leadership team. And we need to have stronger support from the community and the leadership team. And by handling this more honestly, with more integrity, I think we can bring the community back together over this issue. Thank you.
Next up, we have Casey Hedrick.
Hi everyone, my name is Casey Hedrick. I'm with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Larimer County, and I'm just here to say thank you tonight. Poudre School District is an incredible partner and has been for so many years. And again, we want to say thank you, especially the operations team. So we had an event at CSU at the new stadium, and we actually honored Poudre School District's operations team with our Partner of the Year award, but we didn't have the plaque, so we wanted to bring it tonight and present it to Pete if he can accept that. And again, from transportation to IT to safety to general counsel for how we should operate our clubs, Poudre School District has gone above and beyond the call of service to extend beyond their duties to make sure that after school kids are well taken care of as well. So again, thank you guys for everything that you do.
And thanks for all the Boys and Girls Club does. We really appreciate it. Okay, is there anybody else here who would like to make any community comment? Okay, we are good then. Next up, we have the consent agenda. That's 4.0. Would anybody like to make a motion regarding the consent agenda this evening? Nate?
Yes, ooh, hello. I move that the board approve and adopt the recommended actions for the items on the consent agenda.
Second, please? David seconds. Okay. Roll call, Kyla.
Nate?
Yes.
Krista?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye?
Rob?
Aye.
Carolyn? Aye. David?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. Okay, that moves us on to 5.0 discussion items, and 5.1 is the Colorado Education Network draft resolution. Just to be clear, we're talking about this resolution tonight. That was proposed to us by a community member who is a member of the Colorado Education Network at our last meeting. And what we would do then is bring it back on a future agenda once we've discussed it and decided if this is the form that we want to pass it in, if we do want to pass it. So is that acceptable to folks? I think Director Pedersen had a couple of comments that we could address.
Yeah, so I had two questions really that I had posed. One of them is that I'm just looking for it here, the whereas just before the end of the first page where it says whereas per pupil funding in Poudre School District is $25,576,274 below pre-recession levels when adjusted for inflation, and it goes on. To the lay reader, that might be confusing because obviously we don't get $25 million per student. Obviously, what's intended there, certainly for those of us who are involved in this, is clearly understood to mean $25 million in aggregate for all the students. And so if there were just some clearer wording, or maybe just adding in aggregate, or I don't know, just something to clear it up for the lay person. It's not a critical thing, but it's just a clarification. And you want to talk about that one first and then the second one? Okay.
Does everybody agree with Rob that that sounds like a good thing to do? I agree. It read funny to me, and I like adding that.
You put the word aggregate in front of that whole section.
Go ahead, use your mic. David.
Use my mic, yes, I'll learn this yet. Can we just put the word aggregate by itself? I mean, whereas aggregate per pupil funding in Poudre School District is 25?
Certainly addresses my thoughts. I don't know
Yeah.
whether how the district people feel.
Actually, I think I heard somebody say total, and I guess I would go for that, just not to imply that people don't have a advanced secondary education, but some people, it might make it clearer for your average reader, as we're trying to make it clear for your average reader just to say total.
The other thing which I
Oh,
think
okay, I'm
Rob
going to
also-
be corrected by Mr. Kraft.
No,
Go ahead, David, and then
yes,
Tom.
Yes. At another point, someone had the number, how that breaks down on a per pupil basis, and just putting that number in parentheses. Aggregate per pupil funding in the Poudre School District, 25 million below pre-recession levels, or $900 and however many dollars it is per student. Just add that, both pieces of information, just add them in.
Tom, did you have something you wanted to add?
I guess it's a thought more than a suggestion, but I'm wondering if aggregate pupil funding or total pupil funding rather than per pupil funding makes more sense.
Well, and one of the things I would like to get across in this sentence, and the reason it read oddly to me, is I think it's important to make clear that we receive that much less every single year, so annually. So whatever form of wording we determine to use, I would like to just to be clear that it's an annual thing.
I would add, and just part of the conversation is typically when we talk about funding, and I know we're mincing words here a little bit and we want to get clear on the words, but the way it's written, per pupil funding, is typically how you talk about it in the aggregate. If you want to talk about the per pupil amount, the $908 per kid, you would actually flip that and say funding per pupil. That's typically how I see it written, whether it be at the legislature or other arenas. But I understand how this is confusing, and I think you could do any and all that you were talking about to clarify that.
Could we say instead, PSD receives $25 million below pre-recession levels of funding annually? Would that be a fair thing to say? Would that address the various concerns? Oh, Nate, I'm sorry.
I think we ought to ask our council to come back with a recommendation rather than trying to figure it out on the fly here. I think his suggestion was a good one, but might take some more thought, and I would recommend that we do it offline.
Well, could I suggest maybe we get a subcommittee of a couple of people together, board members? I'm not sure this is an attorney thing that we need really, but that would be my thought on it, that I don't think it's really a legal document per se.
If
Rob?
it helps, I'm happy to work with Tom on whatever the wording to reflect the concerns that have been
Okay.
addressed.
I think the subcommittee of two is good.
I think a subcommittee of 2 board members and somebody is good. So Rob, and what other board member would like to volunteer?
I will, and then I won't show up at the subcommittee meeting. Because that would be too many cooks in the stew. No, I'm happy to help.
Okay, is that acceptable to everybody, or would somebody like to volunteer to be on the committee who wants to show up?
So Rob's gonna work in the aggregate.
Okay, Rob, try and get your co-committee member to show up. Rob and Nate, you guys are the committee who's going to work on that. Thank you very much. Now, Rob, do you want to mention the other concern that you had?
Yeah, the other one is a more, is a philosophical thing more than anything else. And that is, the next thing says, whereas as a result of the state budget cuts over the past 9 years, first bullet, Colorado students do not have adequate or equitable access to critical educational opportunities, supports, and individual attention. And that implies to me, when, the words on their face, when read, implies to me that there is no Colorado student who has access to these things. And maybe I'm overreading it. I don't know. That's one possibility. The other is that the majority of the board actually feels that there's no Colorado student who has access to those things, or, so.
I'd say that's not how I read it.
Okay,
But,
well then,
uh,
share with me how you read
And
it.
adequacy and equity. I'm about to go on vacation, can you tell? Okay. Adequacy and efficacy, equitable, yeah, never
Equitable
mind.
access, it doesn't
Whatever
say
we're
anything
talking
about efficacy.
Thank you, I'm sorry. But I didn't read it in that way. But those are the 2 things that everybody's always talking about, and I'm not going to try and say them again tonight. Anybody else on that? And maybe our subcommittee could work on it if you'd like to.
Well, I'd like to get a sense about how the majority, I could
What do other
understand it
people
both
think?
ways. I understand in the aggregate, if you'll forgive reusing the word, that this is a concern that we have, and I certainly have a strong concern that there are a lot of Colorado students who don't have access to this stuff. I don't know that I would say every single student is in that situation, but I could see a philosophical argument that says, since we're talking about the kids as a whole, that's an appropriate statement. And so before I, as a member of this subcommittee, went off and talked with Tom or whoever about this, yeah,
And Nate,
and Nate, about this, I'd want to get a sense about how people feel about it, because I can see it both ways.
can other
That's
people
what I'm
chime in
saying.
on this one? How do other people read it? Christoph, you look like you have an opinion. In case his mic wasn't on, that was straight down the middle, whatever Rob wants. Okay, Susan has something to add. Thank you.
I would agree with the statement about about Colorado students in general not having adequate access, because due to budget cuts, every Colorado student has been impacted, whether they're at a high level or a highly funded district, or if they're not, they're still impacted. So I would go along with saying that for every student, it's not adequate anymore.
Nate?
I think Susan makes a good point, and I think it could go either way. I think the point is made either way, so.
I think we should leave it up to the subcommittee to fine-tune any necessary wording then. And if anybody has any further thoughts, please email Nate and Rob on that. Oh, I'm sorry. Christoph.
So my only question about this is whether there's a board advocate for this resolution in this group or not. And if not, I've looked at the website and I don't find a lot of information about the group itself. So, for example, I don't know whether to vote for it or not. I don't know what actions they're actually going to take. I don't know if they're going to have a budget. I don't know whether they're a politically minded group or not. So I'll just put it out there. Is there a board advocate for this group and the resolution that would want to speak to it?
Yeah, so actually, the Colorado Education Network is really working on the messaging around public education in Colorado. And they're associated, a lot of the people from Great Education Colorado, which is a group that's worked a long time on adequate education funding in Colorado, is sort of behind this effort. It sort of grew out of their spring conference, which I attended, and it's I think it's a good cause. I think it's something where we need to reframe the messages so that people understand why we don't have adequate and equitable funding for education here in Colorado. So I personally think it's a good thing for us to hop on board with. There is no cost for joining. I've joined as an individual, which is very easy to do. It's free. There's not any cost to our board. It's just something that we would do to indicate that we would like to chime in on the need for better public education funding in Colorado. That's my opinion. Other thoughts? Nate?
I would say that while I support the Colorado Education Network, I think it's important to play a role, an active role in it, to help shape what their recommendations are for action that they would endorse. So joining it would help that effort, and it would be better to be a part of it than not be a part of it, so that we can help shape that.
Rob?
So I think that's a fair question, Christoph. And so a follow-up question then to what you just mentioned, Nate, is would we look to identify someone as our primary liaison to this group to have that influence? And would that person be effectively guided by the legislative subcommittee, as an example, in terms of board influence, if you will?
I think we would. That would make sense to do that, and we wouldn't have to do that right now. But Kathy's been involved, and you're on that subcommittee for the resolution, so you might as well do it. So.
Christoph?
So are all boards across Colorado being asked to join? And then I'll just put out a couple of questions at once. Are all boards being asked to join? is the resolution our act to joining, or do we have to push the join button on the website? And finally, is there any outreach to two sides of this story, or is this a one-sided type of organization? In other words, is it a bipartisan organization, or does it have a partisanship role element to it or not? So that's 3 questions.
Okay, I'm going to go backwards. I don't believe it has a partisan element to it. They're just talking about education funding. When we talk to either Republicans or Democrats down at the legislature, I have not heard anybody saying that we're there where we need to be with education funding. That's not what I've heard from any side. Are there differences in fundamentally what we need to do to get better funding for education? Absolutely. So I think that's one side of it. So I don't see it as a partisan organization, but I also don't see Great Education Colorado as a partisan organization. I don't believe it is. DJ, who was here last time, is very involved with Great Education Colorado and the Colorado Education Network, so I think we would just let him know if we pass this resolution, and he would press whatever button we needed to push to go ahead and join. And then, I'm sorry, what was your first question?
Oh, boy. First question was,
Was it?
what's that?
That was the last.
Oh, yeah, are all districts joining?
Oh, yes, I believe all districts are being asked to join as soon as they can get somebody like DJ to come and ask them and specifically invite them personally. But it's a big job with 178 districts in a very geographically diverse state.
I'd like to suggest that we ask DJ to come back at the next meeting to be able to answer some of these questions directly if he's available, and at that time we can ponder his answers and decide whether to vote for this or not.
Please, Christoph.
Okay, and I'll be careful to phrase the question of partisanship. While everybody in the room at the legislature may believe that we're underfunded, the way groups like this discuss it could have a large impact on how it comes across. So our board joining on, in my opinion, we would want to make sure we're involved in things that are productive. And we may have an opinion as to how it should be done, but I would personally choose to support things that have a bent to them where we're involved in productive conversation of how we would get there, not just kind of hammering out a point of view or taking a side. That's why I'm asking that question. So
It's a fair question. Nate, did you have something else? Anybody else? Okay, well, let's go ahead and bring it back as an action item on the next agenda for whatever version that our subcommittee ends up finalizing the wording on. And we will invite DJ to attend as well and allow him to answer whatever questions the board has of him as we consider this item. Is that fair to everybody?
Right, and it won't be on consent, it'll be regular.
It'll be an action item, yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody, for that conversation. And let's go ahead and move on to our next discussion item, which is legislative discussion 5.2. And just so you know, our legislative committee met earlier today, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the state of Colorado. And I'll just summarize it real quickly. Our lobbyist, Ann Barkus, was there to meet with us tonight, and she gave us a lot of good information on some of the statewide committees that are working on the issue of education and funding education and so forth. The first group she talked about was Vision for the Future, which is a governing committee. Basically, the legislature tried to pass a bill last session that wanted to contemplate the vision for education for the future. And I guess nobody really knows what that means. And so it was suggested that perhaps some of us either within our district or within some of the superintendent's group that's working, or other groups might help put some definition around that, because you never know what the legislature is going to do once they decide that it's their deal. But the government, they didn't pass the legislature, the bill didn't, but the governor created the committee, so they're still a committee doing this work, and I don't think they really know what it is they're doing. So I think those of us who might be willing to try and put some framework and structure, because we certainly don't want a committee coming back and telling the legislatures, oh, you need to run a bill that says all school districts must teach kids in this way, or something like that. To us, as school districts, we believe we have local control of education as defined by our state constitution, and that would be a poor idea if they were to do that. So we would like to make sure that they're doing something reasonable. There's also a finance committee for education that's talking about how should the school finance formula work, that was created by a bill in this last legislative session. They're talking about a number of different options, but they've somehow gotten around the number of meetings they're allowed to hold, which was very limited, so that they can now have lots more meetings apparently. But so far they've not done much except talk about the RFP for who's going to work with them. And apparently a very interesting piece of the legislation said that no groups that have worked in Colorado before are allowed to apply, which really is disappointing to me, because we have very unique economic situations defined by our Constitution here in Colorado. So to me, it's too bad that somebody who doesn't better understand the landscape will be able to get the work. But apparently it's not going to pay real well either. So maybe that would have been an issue anyway. So there's the vision group, there's the finance committee. There are other outside groups, such as the superintendents, who are working on perhaps a funding proposal, which might be actually a really, it sounds like they've made some good progress and might be moving in the right direction. There's also groups that are working on messaging that we need to better understand. So one of those groups would be this Colorado Education Network, but there's also another group that it sounds like might be coming somewhat out of the St. Vrain School District. So I think we want to get a better handle on if those groups are working at odds or together, and that would actually be good information to have before we vote on a resolution, I think. So that's kind of where we are. We all last time signed up in teams of 2 to approach our elected officials, our state and federal elected officials. I know I have not contacted mine yet and won't be able to for a few weeks, but I hope everybody's starting to work with their partners on who they're going to meet with, and report back to us after you've had an opportunity to meet with your legislative person. And I know Rob had an item, and if anybody wants to add anything from that meeting, feel free, but I know Rob also had an item he wanted to talk about in terms of talking to our legislators about funding.
Yeah, one of the things we had talked about a couple of meetings ago, actually, legislative subcommittee meetings ago, was when we talk to our legislators, it might be interesting to get their perspective on what catastrophe or other event, catastrophe or not, do they think might prompt the legislature to act in a bipartisan way to actually address the looming financial crisis that's going to come before us. And that's not only related to education, obviously, transportation, a lot of other elements of the state budget will be affected when we get to a place where some of the financial constraints, Tabor and Gallagher and others in the Constitution severely limit the funding that's available to meet the needs of the state. And so I guess the analogy that most comes to my mind is we're sort of a frog in a pot of water that's getting heated up, right? And so we don't really have, we're getting minor fixes along the way. For example, at the last legislative session, they moved the hospital provider fee as they made it a fee as opposed to part of the general revenue that has to be counted under the Tabor cap. So that will have some benefit for some probably small number of years, in terms of alleviating the crisis that I think most legislators, both Democrats and Republican, expect to happen at some point. And I'm just curious how our legislators are thinking about when's the appropriate time to really bite the bullet and deal with the difficult issues that are going to need to be dealt with in order to address that question in a systemic way and also in a bipartisan way. And so I made some notes about that. I'll be happy to share them with you. There's nothing much more than what I just said in them. But, that's one of their responsibilities, to be worrying about the fiscal state of the state, if you will. And I guess one of the things that comes to my mind is occasionally I've talked to folks and they've said, well, when our party wins the all the levers of state government, be that, Senate, House, and the governorship, well, then we can deal with it in the way that's appropriate. Well, it's never clear. I mean, it's not clear that that's necessarily going to happen. Some of us may have opinions about that would be a good thing or that wouldn't be a good thing or whatever, but that's not the reality that we face right at the minute anyway. And we can't keep just putting it off. And I guess the follow-up question would be, okay, well, fine, even if you think that's the answer, what is it you're going to do? And how do you think that would actually solve this problem? Because it's going to be a hard thing. Anyway, enough said. I don't want to monopolize the meeting, but I think it's fair to ask that question.
Christoph.
I like generally where you're going with this, and I'm looking for something we might be able to approach them with. In other words, I'm thinking what our objectives in meeting with these folks is to inform our advocacy. And so I'm wondering if what you're looking for is where could we go with each of these folks that would lean us towards a bipartisan solution of what we could advocate, rather than asking them what's the barrier to entry, or what's the calamity that's going to suddenly get us all to work together. Maybe what we're asking is what is it that we could advocate that would take us all to the table or something. Is that maybe appropriate?
I think that's another way to look at it. I guess the reason I framed it the way and I think that's a very positive way to look at it. And I think, frankly, the notes that I put together are all about having a conversation. I would implore you not to read this to the legislator and hope to get an answer. It's just to inform our thinking. And I think your thought is a good one as well. The only reason I phrased it this way is because, frankly, when I've had conversations with legislators about this kind of thing in the past, I've gotten, well, we just can't, there's just nothing we can do, and that's not because, the Republicans or the Democrats control this or that element of the legislature or the governorship or whatever. So I think that's an excellent framing as well.
Other thoughts, comments? Okay, well, got our work cut out for us if we're going to solve the problems of K-12 education in Colorado. So thank you all for your help with that. I guess that brings us to work session topics.
I just add, when you say
sorry.
we, I know you were when you say we, everybody who's watching this and all of the people who aren't watching this are going to be an important part of this because frankly, it's going to involve financial decisions, involving taxes and spending and whatnot that a lot of people in the state, even those who don't have children, are going to care deeply about. And as we pointed out, it's not only education, it's transportation and a bunch of other stuff as well. So
That's very true. The health of education in our state is really the future of prosperity in our state. So thank you for that. And so hope everybody gets involved. Okay. So 6.0 work session topics, and we have one tonight, which is 6.1, Growth for All Learners, Achievement Gap Update. And it looks like we have our great Assistant Superintendent trio to talk about these things, Ginger Haber, Scott Nielsen, and Todd Lambert. Thank you.
We'll get started in just a second. Scott's got to go over here and save public education in Colorado. He'll be right back. I also promise we did not coordinate outfits up here tonight. This is Kip, Dr. Smizer, board. Thanks for having us here. We have two purposes tonight for our time together. The first purpose is to provide you with an update regarding what our administrators and teachers are doing at the school level to deal with issues associated with equity and performance gaps and ensuring that every student in Poudre School District gets the opportunity to achieve and grow. The second purpose that we have will be to engage our board members in a question and answer session about what you hear tonight. Asking us questions about what we've done, what we're doing, and what we're going to do will be welcomed. And we would really like to engage you in that work. I'll take about maybe 12 to 14 minutes somewhere in there to do the presentation. We talked about doing it passing off, but that's always a little awkward to say Ginger will take the next 2 slides and Scott will take the next 2. So I'm going to go ahead and be the one to push through this work. If you look at the 6 faces on the screen behind you, those 6 smiling faces, I can assure you that those 6 children are the 6 most important children in the world to the 3 people sitting up here in front of you tonight. There is nothing we would fail to do to provide the best experiences for them in life that we possibly could. They are our most important treasure. So as we do our work tonight, we think about your questions, you think about what's going on out in the district. Think who's in your picture. Who would you put up there? Who's most important to you? And think about your feelings for those individuals and what you would want for them. A couple of weeks ago, Dr. Smizer was with our new teachers at New Teacher Orientation over at Poudre High School. And she reminded them of this in her way. And she reminded them that every child that walks through those doors is somebody's most important person. And they have that feeling, that intensity for them, and we trust our teachers to come and deal with those students every single day. And we want them to look through the lens that their parents look through, that their grandparents look through, and have the love and care for them that you have for yours. And it was an important moment for them. It was a perspective that I think they needed to have, and it's the perspective all of our educators try to walk the walk with every day in Poudre School District. But the real question is, as we look, we have an ultimate goal for every student. Doesn't matter if it's a boy or girl, tall, short, brown, white, black, doesn't matter. Every one of them should get that exceptional experience. And so we're tracking that and we're monitoring that. And our ultimate goal is to eliminate the predictability that any one subgroup of students is going to underperform against any other subgroup. And so we're taking that very seriously and we're monitoring that. So I thought tonight we could talk about how we're doing briefly and then what we're doing about it. I'm going to put some data up on the screen behind you, but I'm going to ask that you look at it in a couple of different ways. The first thing is that data are represented as median growth percentiles. Now, I apologize to Dwayne if he's watching this on TV that I don't mangle the explanation. But as you know, in Colorado, we have a growth model, which means that a student takes an assessment, and the following year, they're put in a cohort with students with same scores, and we compare them against similar students to monitor, to measure growth. We give each student a growth percentile number. For a median growth percentile for a group like all students that you see at the top there, we take all those individual percentile numbers and we put them in order from the lowest to a highest. We find the middle score, and that's our median growth percentile. So that gives you a percentile for a whole group. For the purposes of this, in Colorado, when we talk about all students, the median score is a 50.0. General rule of thumb is when we're talking about these big groups, any scores that are above 50.0 outperform the state in growth, and that's a good number. When you talk about the groups below all students, some of our subgroups that we're highlighting, that number of 50.0 probably drops just a little bit. It's probably a little below 50 at the state level. So again, any numbers that exceed that are positive. But that's not the point tonight. What you're looking for, and the angle that we're asking you to look at this data, is more holistically. If we achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is eliminating that predictability about subgroups compared to subgroups, those numbers should be pretty close to the same. They may not be identical, but they shouldn't be far off. They should be fairly clustered together. So what I would like for you to do, I'm going to leave each slide up here, elementary first, which is already up, then middle school, then high school. And I'd like you to pay attention to variability, not any specific number, About a couple of meetings from now, about a month from now, Dr. Schmitz will be here, and he will dissect that data, those scores, every single aspect of this performance, and he is preparing for that night, and we're looking forward to it as well. But for tonight, just look at the variability between numbers on the screens, and I'll just put one up, leave it up for about 5 or 6 seconds, go to the next one, go to the next one. At the end, what I want you to think about and contemplate is, how close are we to what we're really trying to achieve, or do we still have some numbers that are more than 1 or 2 points off at any given time? So elementary sits up there. Leave that up there for just a minute. You see growth last year, growth this year, and median growth percentiles. Middle school. Again, looking for variability. And high school. So if we've arrived and we've done all that we can regarding equity and performance gaps, those numbers are going to be tight. We're really pleased with our performance. We're a high-performing, high-growth district, but it doesn't mean that we don't keep going after this work. It's important to us. Again, remember, who's in your picture? Who's in our picture every day that walks in the classroom? One of the nicest things that we have available to us in the last, I'd say 10 to 11 years are great advancements in our profession regarding learning theory and, more importantly, the impact of certain things on student achievement. And we have really, the latest researchers, or the researchers that have been the most prominent and probably most informative, have put together something they call an effect size. Now, I will caution you that the effect sizes that we're talking about tonight are probably not as sophisticated as the one Dwayne's going to use, and that's a blessing to have him on our team. But for our purposes, they'll do for tonight. If you look at that thing that looks like a protractor behind you, let me explain what an effect size is. You take any type of effect, it could be cooperative learning, impact on achievement. Breakfast before school, impact on achievement. Teacher-student relationship, impact on achievement. And you measure that impact with the effect size. If you look behind me, working left to right, those numbers ascend. Those numbers usually go between 0.00 and 1.0. If the effect is really bad, it can have reverse effects and be below 0. It can also be above 1.0 if it's really promising and really effective. So keep that in mind as we look at that. So in Poudre School District, our best hope is that we're looking for impacts above 4.0 in the blue. Those are impacts that are worth going after. Let me explain what I mean by that real quick. If a school is in negative momentum on achievement and growth, any movement is positive, right? You want to gain enthusiasm, you want to gain promise, you want to gain momentum back the other way. So if it moves the needle a little bit, it might be worth investing in. When you're a district that's high performing, high growth, you want to be sure your investments are worth their time. You can't do everything. So we look to be in the blue. We look to be above 4.0 or 0.40. Hope that makes sense as you look at the number that goes along there. I'm going to put up some effects on the next slide about some things that impact student achievement. And the first one's going to look really familiar to you if you read the article that was attached in the board packet. Talked about collective teacher efficacy. So if you look at those numbers and knowing that 0.40 is a number that we are striving for, those numbers look pretty promising right there. And I'll do a real quick explanation for what each one of them means because they're going to play into our work and our question and answer. Collective teacher efficacy is just the belief that teachers working together to improve performance in kids truly believe that their work has impact. They're confident that the work they do is going to make a difference. Assessment-capable learners are children who know where they are, where they're going, and how to get there. And that can only be achieved in interaction with teachers. Success criteria is simply a student knowing what's expected of them and what performance will be necessary to achieve the goal. Formative evaluation is a fancy way of saying teachers getting together, teaching, giving kids an assessment, looking at the results, making adjustments, assess them again, give them the results, give them a performance, but it's constantly teachers striving to find what's best for kids and the secret to the learning that's there. Feedback is just what it says. How does a teacher work with a student to give meaningful feedback so they can improve performance? And finally, the last two, teacher clarity, which is the teachers that are working together, are they clear on their curricular aim? What are they aiming for? Are they all aiming for the same thing, and do they understand that? And finally, the last one I think you'll find most interesting, that's student-teacher relationship. That's a 0.72. I don't know if this will make you really like your ends anymore. I hope it does. But teacher-student relationship on an impact on achievement is almost 4 times the impact as opposed to teacher content knowledge of their subject matter. That's how much that belief in someone means at the student level. So if you look at all these right here, these are all promising. The big play, of course, is to try to find anything where you can bring it all together and leverage as many of those high-profile items that have those high effect sizes for kids. So I'm going to take a brief moment then. I'm going to keep these up on the screen, and I'm going to briefly explain what an impact team really does at a school level. All right? And you see how many of those elements you can see in those ones that are up on the screen. An impact team is truly a group of teachers. At the elementary, it's probably a grade level. At the middle school or high school, it's probably a subject group that share the same content. They work together. Their first priority is to identify the standards that matter the most. And they do that by identifying standards that are probably leveraged across multiple subjects and multiple grades. Once they identify what those standards are, and they know what they're going to be about, they determine what is the most important to demonstrate success for a student. Then they provide students with great instruction. They give them, they give them an assessment task or just a task itself or an assignment. They come together, they evaluate performance, they make adjustments. They come back and evaluate performance again. They make adjustments. They come back, they evaluate it again. It's an iterative process. That's the formative part of it until they get where they need to go. And at the end, the best hope is that all students at any level are going to achieve their highest levels of growth and achievement. So when you think about that process, just an overview summary of it, and you look at these elements, and you start to realize that you have something promising there. And this is where we believe that our work in teams at all levels, all the way from early childhood through our high schools, we hope to ultimately achieve these type of results. I put behind me a nice little picture of some Bowder teachers a few weeks ago working together, and also a list of the characteristics of these teams as they do their work. And I won't, I know you don't like to have a slide read to you any more than I like to have one read to me, so I'll leave those up there, but I want to make a brief comment on each one of them. That first one about the commitment to every learner. On all of our literature, our website, and even what we say up in front of people, we say every child every day. We say every child matters. Our community should not let us forget that we say this. Every child means every child. So if you're going to say you're accounting for every child, you should have a process in teaching and learning that accounts for every child. That's one of the best features about this process. There is nowhere for a child to be ignored, to be respected. They're all there because when those teachers come together and they look at every kid's performance, it's every kid. And that's the best way to go at that because that ensures that we have differentiation. It ensures that our most talented kids are able to grow. It ensures that our most struggling learners have the opportunity to learn and relearn and get the kind of help that they need to get to those levels of success we want them to get to. The administrator promoting and participating in team meetings. They don't lead them. It's not their job. Their job is to be there, to be an inspiration, to be an asset, to clear the way for those teachers to do great work. Meeting weekly. We expect our people to meet regularly to do this work because the work never stops. We expect them to learn and adjust from the evidence. When students perform one of these tasks or they complete an assessment, that's evidence to both the teacher and the kid. It's evidence to the teacher of how they're teaching, how effective is their teaching. Right? If they look for that, and it's evidence to the student that's that assessment-capable learner, where am I right now? Where am I going? How do I get there? We have trained peer facilitators. That means that someone is at the table that has a strong understanding of how this work flows, so it doesn't just randomly bounce around from one person to another. When they sit down at the table in this work and it's very purposeful, somebody is trained to do it, to facilitate the group. A trained facilitator can make all the difference. We believe our teachers need to strengthen relational trust. When you think about the best teams you've ever been on, you had relational trust, and it's no different for our teachers. And finally, making purposeful, descriptive feedback. One of the new things in our profession that we're finding out is giving great results is when our teachers can have a level of trust together where they can start to ask questions about each other's work. They can start to critique in a safe way. They can learn from each other in a safe way. And once they get to that point and that trust has been achieved, there's no limit to what they can do. You notice that a few of these are bold printed. You've heard us at times in the profession talk about professional learning communities, right? It's a chance for adults essentially to come together to consider what students are doing, to do some of the, in fact, many of the same things that you see in these impact teams. But if you look at the ones in bold, those are the real difference makers between a professional learning community, and we know now through research that about 50% of them fail, and a high impact team. What they really did is the groups that are paying attention to high impact teams, they studied failing professional learning communities, and they said, what was causing them not to reach their highest levels? Well, they found out a lot of times the person running the meeting wasn't a trained facilitator. They found out that the administrator wasn't a presence, which is a critical part of this work. And finally, teachers were so busy in some of those professional learning communities thinking about what they were doing that they failed to learn from each other. And so we feel great promise in the work that is going on in our high impact teams. And I want to make one other point, and I know we're going to get to Q&A here in just a second. We have effective teams and have had effective grade level and subject matter teams at all levels in this district long before we went down this road. And so the message that we're giving to our teachers and to our principals is that if you have highly effective teams that are getting great results, we just ask that you pay attention to the professional development we offer in this area and you keep rolling. We have many schools that prior to this made Loctite agreements with their staff on committing to teams. We don't want to disrupt that momentum for them. On the other hand, when we have individual contractors, when we have situations where teachers aren't working collectively together, those days are over. The results are too vivid to ignore. And so that's the work we're pushing on. And I know some of you at times have come to Summer Institute or different things, and you've had a chance to see these teachers working on this work, and you saw how powerful and the enthusiasm that went along with that. 2 more slides and we'll be done. One of the things that Scott and Ginger and I are working on a great deal is what is the principal role, assistant principal role in this work when they're not sitting down at the team? Their job is to create these conditions. These are the 4 conditions where a team can develop collective efficacy. They start with relational trust. They have to have it. We've talked about that. They use feedback to learn from one another. They have an opportunity to learn together, and then they learn from others, and then they also have an opportunity to master their success and experience success for themselves. They can't just do that. Our teachers are incredibly busy. To make them responsible for every bit of that work doesn't make sense. We have to push, and we do push, our administrators to lead this work. And when we say to them, when they say, how do we get these teams going, and we go through everything, we tell them the most important thing you can do is make sure these conditions exist. Make sure they're possible. Do everything you possibly can. Ginger, me, Scott, our job is to not let them get distracted from that work by piling on a new thing or another thing. We get focused on this, we dig in. And that's the assurances that we made to our principals this year. And finally, I'll just leave this back up. When a team, let me go back one more. When a team is clicking, they have these elements. These are the adults. When a kid is where we want that kid to be, when they're at the optimum moment to learn, they are an assessment-capable learner. Let me repeat that. They know where they are, they know where they're going, and they know how to get there. When we can get our students to that level, in a high-performing, high-growth district like we have, we open the door for every one of those kids, including those ones that are in your picture. What we're doing right now, we started this work last spring with Putnam Elementary School. It's no secret, you were here when Steve came and we talked about a priority improvement plan for Putnam, and the fire was hot there. And the Putnam staff willingly embraced this work. They gave their time, they gave their effort, they gave up other things because they recognized how just incredibly important this work turned out to be. And they were willing to do that work, including the 3rd grade team at Putnam that was willing to do this work in what we call the fishbowl, meaning they did the work with the trainer, so they're learning along the way, which can be a little awkward and tedious, with an audience around them, filming, watching, probably whispering, talking, making sense of all that work. And bless their hearts, that 3rd grade team never gave up. They hung in there. They blazed a trail for the rest. Now we move forward. In this past summer, we brought a group of principals who were interested together and did some training at Summer Institute, which some of you had a chance to see. And this fall, we have committed our 6 Title I elementary schools to developing impact teams at each school There's where we have concerns sometimes regarding equity, regarding performance gaps, and we want to go take dead aim right at that problem, right where that fire's the hottest. So they're participating this year with one of our consultants who leads this work, as well as our very capable professional development team that also does this work, and we're really excited about the possibilities as we go along. Now, here's the great thing. Those 6 schools jumped in, 5, 7 other principals said, wait a minute, don't leave us out. We can only use our experts, our consultants for so much. We can't have them here every single day, plus we don't have the capacity. We have other things going on. So those schools are also learning along the way and participating in this work and leading their teams, and they're soaking it up like sponges, which is great. We had a lot of angst when we first announced that we were only going to be able to do this direct work with the 6 Title Is. We thought it was a great sign that a lot of others jumped in, including all the way through into secondary as well. At the secondary level, they got their introductory training this year. I can tell you the first day that group got together, it was kind of hard to pick Scott out of the clouds. He was so excited about the work that they did and the enthusiasm they had for it. They're going to do some work this fall, and you can ask Scott some questions about that. And then this spring, as we come into the spring of 18, they'll do some more coaching and consulting, and they'll move forward with this work as well. I think it goes without saying, you can tell from my enthusiasm, we find great promise in this work. We think our administrators find great promise in this work, but most importantly, it's about every kid in the picture, and that's what matters. And now we are ready for a discussion and any questions that you'd like to throw at us.
Okay, board members. Nate?
Is there research out there, or do you have a way to know or to explain the impact that teacher efficacy has on whether teachers stay in the profession, or lack of efficacy as a significant factor for why they might leave the profession? How does that impact that?
Yeah, Nate, I don't want to quote a study I'm not familiar with or anything like that. There's a lot of evidence out there about what takes people out of the profession. One of the important aspects to consider certainly is their confidence level and the belief in themselves. So I'm certain that there probably are some ties, but without just off the top, I don't want to start quoting stats off the top. I'm certain there are.
I appreciate you asking that question, because in the article it talks about the principal's role in creating that culture within the building, where even our young teachers or our teachers who are first-year teachers have those mastery moments. They have those opportunities to experience success, and that the leadership team, administrators are really working together to create that culture. And when teachers are meeting in teams, especially a brand new teacher, what an opportunity to learn from their colleagues and to experience success, as opposed to just having to work in isolation.
And then, so I appreciate that, and I would assume that someone who wants to go into teaching wouldn't go into it if they didn't have efficacy kind of starting out, and then they get support. Are there other places where that efficacy falls off than the ones that you identified in bold? Or are those primarily the ones that affect whether efficacy is continued or whether it falls off?
I assume when you're talking about bold, you mean the screen
yeah,
right here?
yeah.
I think these are more, if I understand your question, I think these are more about the differences in what makes a team successful, or maybe gives you a more of an assurance a team is going to be successful versus an old model. Those ones that are in bold tend to be the difference makers through the research. As far as efficacy of a teacher in that role, I'm not sure about a correlation or connection between those particular ones and their efficacy. I have to think about that one a little bit. I think one of the nice things this year is, last year we had 1 grade level in the fishbowl. This year we have 6 schools in the fishbowl. And they are willing partners and willing to build the learning as a learning organization. Our product is learning. They're willing to make that go across the way and invite others in to see where we are with it.
I think too, Nate, that the efficacy rating is collective. So it's collective. It's a group of teachers that are effective together. And I think that has to do with the environment in the building. And when a new teacher straight out of university lands in a spot like that, the chances I think of them staying and feeling productive and like this is worthwhile work, they're going to do better because they're part of an effective team, and all their kids are going to do better. So I think you hear so many stories of people feeling alone, and not necessarily in our district, but feeling alone in the profession and not having people coaching them, not really knowing what they're doing, and that can burn you out pretty quick.
Okay. And I have some questions about the growth numbers, but maybe we don't want to go on because it's kind of a different part of the presentation, so I'll
Well-
hold off on that unless you want me to ask it.
Go ahead.
So when we go back to those growth numbers, I just wondered if you could go back to that slide or one of the slides and explain what those numbers mean. Is it,
Sorry.
like, for example, English IEP 2015-16 is 35. Does that mean they grew 35% from where they were the previous year?
Yeah. What that number means is they took all of the students that would have an IEP and they took their individual growth numbers. Remember, they get an individual growth number by taking the assessment and then the following year getting in a
Right.
cohort and comparing their growth.
Right.
They line that cohort up, lowest score to highest score, and give them a percentile number. So for the IEP, they would take all of the students with an IEP, they would line them up by their percentile numbers and hit the middle score. So for students in Poudre School District in 2015-16, students with an IEP, if you lined all of those students up and put their individual growth numbers in order, the middle number would be a 35.
And that would be a 35 percentile compared to all of the students?
That's compared to the students with the IEPs.
That's compared to the students with the IEPs?
Yes.
And so, Rob has a question, but is this part of the puzzle of what the Federal Department of Education is asking the state about how we report scores, or is this a whole different thing?
I don't believe it has anything to do with that.
Okay.
Rob, it looks like you're dying to clarify something over there.
Well, I guess my understanding had been that the 35th percentile was compared to all students, not compared to other IEP students in the state, because that would say that that our students are doing significantly worse than other IEP students in the state, and I'm not aware that that's the case.
It's compared to IEP students.
Okay. So you're saying that
The state would have a number as well for that. Let me explain that. The state would also have a percentile of IEP students that we would compare to. That data, that number's not up there. We would look at our students just in Poudre School District. If you lined them all up at elementary, the middle number's a 35. We would also.
Right, but it's 35, but it's 35 compared to a 50 for all students is what I'm.
They're two different groups, two different numbers.
We'll talk offline,
Sure.
I guess.
Yeah.
'Cause-
I can show you the difference and show you a state
No, I
number and show how
understand.
they line
Fine.
it up.
So can I ask my other questions that don't involve clarification? Well, not that clarification, anyway. When you talk about instituting high-impact teams in the Title I schools or in any schools going forward, are you anticipating high-impact teams at each grade level, or is it across grade levels, or how does that work?
I think it'll be individual to individual schools, but the model that like Putnam's chosen, and I think that other elementaries may look at, is more the grade level teams, like a third grade level team or fourth grade
Okay.
level team.
And
Within those teams, we're also asking administrators to think about including like integrated services teachers as well as intervention teachers, so everyone's there at the table.
Okay, and I assume in
At the
secondary,
yeah, at the
department.
secondary level, we have, in buildings, particularly at the middle level, we have some grade levels and some content. At the high school, it's generally going to be content teams.
Yeah.
But we have energy around both those levels, or both those opportunities in terms of how we look at the standards that we can leverage, particularly at the middle school, across content, which is one of the the ways that you can truly enhance what's going on in the classroom.
Okay. And I guess the follow-up question to that piece, and then I'll defer to whoever else has questions, and I might have a couple more. When do you anticipate that there'll be high-impact teams in every school and across departments and grade levels as appropriate to the school?
Let's talk, our expectation is that we have highly effective teams. Impact teams follow a special protocol that we
Right.
showed up here. So our
Right.
expectation is that we have highly effective teams at every school in every one of our buildings. As far as impact teams go, I think that's an opportunity for us to engage with the school and check out their level of performance and determine what's the best course of action.
Okay.
So for right now, this year, we have an expectation that all 6 of the Title I elementary
Mhm.
schools have one model team at the school level, a minimum.
Okay.
And we work with that one team. What we're finding out, because of the contagious nature of this work, is that they're finding more than one. Some are having 3, some are having 4. Ultimate goal is that all of our teams are effective, and if they want to plug into that high-impact protocol, we sure make that available to them.
Okay, so what I just heard, what I think I heard you say is that there is not a district-wide expectation that every school will eventually have a high-impact team. That's not to say
No.
they're not effective or anything like that. I'm just
Right.
asking about this particular
Right.
thing. There's not an expectation that everybody will have a high-impact team.
That's right.
Thank you.
David and then Christoph.
I have some questions related to hiring. You've got an established team, and then somebody retires. And what is the role of the team in choosing its own new member in the whole hiring process? What do you look for in an effective team member that's different from what you may have used to looked at in terms of a teacher you would be happy to hire? And did that lead to any changes in hiring criteria?
It does, and I think I'll cite Kennard as an example of a school that has gone through that process. At the secondary level, they're the furthest along in terms of the teaming process. And if you were to talk to the teachers there, they would talk about how intentional they are now of interviewing for that collaborative partnership. They truly are looking for someone that's ready to engage in that, but they're also very transparent on the front side that the expectation when you step into Kennard is that you'll be part of a collaborative team, you'll be part of an impact process, and the expectation is you'll be sharing, learning, and doing the work as a team as opposed to doing it individually. When you watch the team process move, you start to see the expectation, the support, that's that collective aspect that you gather, and once you have it, you want it. And so when you see buildings that have already gone down that road, there definitely is an intentionality to what you're looking for, how you ask questions, and how you set kind of the expectation, because when you sit with a interviewee, they're often interviewing you as well. So being transparent, and Jesse will openly say, if you have a chance to talk to them, that they are very intentional around how they look for the people. And so that's helped them continue to have this process where they fully expect to meet and go through this process weekly.
I just was wondering, just the way you just phrased it, you've had a group of interviews, and what are the things that somebody says or does where you say, this is somebody we want, as opposed to somebody else says or does, and you say, don't want that. I was just curious how that process, I've been in a lot of hiring teams over the years.
I guess one of the things I would say to that, David, is, I mean, as you ask questions, you could start with a formative process. Talk about what the formative process looks like, or describe how a formative process might be part of a team, and see what the energy is, or how they see the process they might go through. What kids know, what are we going to do about it, and am I doing it individually? So as you're listening to the answer, do I perceive that the responsibility is myself, or do I see the responsibility as a group answer? I mean, that's a way that you can begin to look at the way others respond to questions.
I think another thing that I've practiced, I've seen be really successful with interviews, that is the question about, you know, what happens if you have some disagreement about a candidate, is ahead of time to say, what is the kind of person that we want? What are those qualities that we're looking for, and have a chance to talk about that before you sit down for the interviews can help that consensus building at the end be really productive.
David, I would also tell you that our work with our principals in this area also spills over to our assistant principals. And we've been very clear about what those priorities are in the system and what our expectations are for their leadership. And so we have conversations all the time about, you know, these are the skills we value, and if you're going to come to the interview table and come into one of these roles in our district, these are skills we would be at a bare minimum we would expect you to have when you sat down for the interview.
Christoph.
Okay, so I really like the way you concluded, which was we see great promise in the work. And I guess where that leads me is measurements. And I understand we'll speak with Dr. Schmitz about it in 2 weeks. But
Sure.
that said, would it be 2 months, sorry. Whatever.
Probably not soon enough.
Yeah, not soon enough, so.
He's probably ready right now. I could call him and bring him in. but-
Bring him in. Just one simple question, and then I'll switch directions. So, but would it be fair to say that, and this is kind of a follow-on to both Nate and Rob, would it be fair to say that we will start watching progress maybe through the discontinuity tests that he's going to be providing for us? Is that kind of what we're starting to model this at Putnam?
Certainly
And
be
if
one
we have
measure we would pay
success,
close
we might
attention
see
to.
a break in their curve.
Yes.
Okay.
We would hope that we would see that, but
Okay.
we also monitor on the, you know, they're designing tasks, giving assessment.
Sure.
So
We'll
we're
look
watching
at
that
other
progress
things
as well.
Sure. And along those lines, in one of the slides, you talked about a commitment to high expectations for every learner, and you kind of stopped on that. And I was kind of wondering, you know, what's the measurement for that? And it got me pondering. You show growth, but and I know the intention is that's not the only measurement, but what I'm wondering is, so I understand it's also tracking where students go with their classes. Are we watching how students track through their math classes and put that on these as well? Not just growth in a class, but where they grow as a student through the classes. Is there any? So if a kid starts in 3rd grade at Putnam with 3rd grade math and maybe is low, but we not only watch their growth, but see if they jump into the next class and eventually see themselves in Algebra 2 by the time they're in 8th grade versus, you know, it strikes me that that's almost as important as whether they're growing every year. Any thought to that? Or?
I think that the dashboard that we have developed will really help us in that process, because the student dashboards show 5 years of progress of a student as far as their could be. We even have DIBELS. We're going to have SAT on there, their CMAS scores. So in between grade levels, we can watch the trajectory of the students as far as their achievement is concerned. And we also have a way that we're actually tracking the connectedness data that way too. So it's not the specific classes like you asked, but certainly as far as achievement is concerned, we can watch a student's progress over time in a real efficient and clear way.
Okay. And from what I understand, by the time they're taking an SAT, it may be too late for them to recover, right? So if we're tracking them, but we've not watched them grow through their classes, their SATs may already be low at that point.
Right, and I think that's where the impact teams and the high-performing teams are so important, that we were bringing teams of teachers together to, most importantly, watch the students' growth within that year so that we can catch any kind of misunderstandings or areas where student didn't understand a certain part of an assessment, so we can go back and do the reteach within that year so that we can keep that progress going. And I think that's one of the real powers of the impact teams and our professional learning communities.
Rob.
So I wanted to follow up a little bit on in thinking about it a little bit on what I asked about earlier. So you said there wasn't an expectation that every school will have high impact teams, or not, yeah, there wasn't that expectation. You also said earlier in your presentation that the time of individual teachers is over. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's more or less, I think, what you said. That teachers teaching in isolation.
That's a better way to say it, sure.
Fine.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. Sorry.
We like our teachers, we want to keep them around, Rob. It's not over. It's just starting tomorrow for elementary.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Now, the question is, if you're not going to have high impact teams in every school, right, how do you know that that kind of isolated teaching is not going on in pockets, if you'll call it that, in the district somewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've said that we don't have an expectation that people, when we say high impact teams, follow that protocol exactly. However, we do have an expectation that our schools work and our adults work in teams in some way to be effective. The way we monitor that work, we certainly pay attention to performance scores, and particularly Scott and I go through the evaluation process with our principals, and one of the things we talk a great deal about is how they organize the adults in the building to do the best for kids. So we will ask questions. In fact, as part of our process in evaluation, we often ask, and I know Scott and I were just talking about this today as we get ready to do that professional growth work with principals this year, we're asking specifically, point blank, what are you doing to cultivate teams? What are you doing to create those conditions for collective efficacy? We're asking them to take a stance on that. It doesn't necessarily have to follow that high impact protocol, but there are plenty of great examples of highly effective teams out there that don't follow that protocol, but they're very committed to that work. I think I saw Mrs. Smith in here from McGraw earlier. She's still back there. They're a great example of a group of people who committed to being teams. They do it great. They don't follow that high impact team protocol exactly, but they are effective teams, and their teachers don't work in isolation.
I think it's a pretty important piece, so as we think about the process, it is a process. And so as we think about building collective efficacy, creating relational trust, it's not like turning on a switch. It's going to take time in buildings, and so as we build it, we've talked to the secondaries and elementaries about how do we meet you where you are, because I talked earlier about Kennard. Kennard's been doing teaming since it opened. They've been working on that process now for 10 plus years. Other schools have dabbled in it. And so how do we, again, from our level, how do we create the trust and build the efficacy at the leadership level and help them to build that trust and the efficacy collectively at the sites? And every adult will go through that process at a different rate. And so we've got to recognize that we're on a journey and that it won't be an overnight success, and buildings will move at different rates, and that's okay. We need to have a plan and be moving in that direction, and that's the expectation. And I talked earlier, as we think we're on the front side of that evaluation process, and that one of the questions we'll be having conversations with our principals is, what is that plan and what's it look like, and how will they know they've moved the needle in their buildings during the 17-18 school year?
Okay, cool.
I think I was just going to add that it really looks different in different grade levels too. It's quite natural in an elementary school for the first grade teachers to all work together, or the fifth grade teachers. It starts looking different at middle school, and
And
then
high school.
way
Way
different
different
at
in
high school.
That's right.
And so at each level, they're exploring what's the most effective way to use teaming, which parts of the teaching staff should be, really implementing high impact teams versus others that maybe it's different. It's more about collaboration. It's less about scores and skill level. It just depends, and I'm thinking
understand.
high school in particular.
Okay. So following up on that, is teacher efficacy one thing and teaming skills another thing? Are those in the performance evaluation metrics for teachers in the district?
Efficacy is not mentioned in the performance. They are different things. Teacher efficacy individually is just any individual teacher's belief that the work
Yeah,
they
I
do makes a
understand.
difference, right? And then the team part of it's there. There are elements in the evaluation, though, about how teachers work with colleagues, work with teams. Absolutely, that's a big part of that. As far as efficacy called out, it's probably pretty hard to pinpoint that in an evaluation.
Yeah, I probably asked that part wrong. What I really mean is it an expectation of the principals that they have that kind of conversation with their staff individually as part of their performance? I mean, as a manager, gauge where their staff is at and how they can support them in increasing their own feeling of efficacy. That it's not, a check mark on a rubric. Sorry, that was a bad phraseology. Is that the expectation that? I would think. Yeah.
Kind of stumbling over which one of us should answer this. We'll go to the most recent principal to my left here and see what his answer is on that one.
So that rubric for us it's in the plus section, right? The collaboration, communication, how you work with your coworkers.
Okay.
It fits in that compartment. And yes, you are having conversations with principals about how they collaborate, and we can continue to enhance those conversations.
Sure.
Just like we have with students, Rob, every one of them is different and
And they're all
important, and their
learning.
growth is there.
Yeah,
It's the same with our principals. Our principals take great pride in their ability to coach, work through the inquiry process, and learn along the journey as well.
Okay, that's fair. I guess one other question on those mechanical kind of things. We talked about hiring, and you had mentioned Kennard as an example, and it's sort of in the regard to teaming, it's one of the standouts because of their history in doing that for 10 years or whatever it's been, right? I guess is that kind of expectation in the hiring process being propagated throughout the other schools and their hiring processes? And is there anything that the central HR department can do to help support that in terms of setting expectations going forward? I mean, we just, we're fortunate in that we have a lot of applicants for most of our positions, right? And so it might be fair to make clear that we have expectations of teaming, and frankly, if you think you're going to come in here and work on your own, don't bother to apply. I mean, I don't want to try to establish protocols here, but I'm just trying to see whether
this is why you don't work in HR.
I understand that, of course, but you know what I mean. I mean, is there anything that Central can do, right? And
I actually think. I trust that you know I'm teasing you. So I actually think that for our leadership, as they are developing a culture in the building, the more successful the culture is in the building, the more the teachers who are on the hiring team, that's who they're looking for. They're looking for their next colleague. And so it's kind of like success breeds success breeds success. And the stronger the teams get in the schools and the more collaborative spirit to the profession, the more that's who they're looking for. So it's not like we have to write a rule, but we keep building the culture so that we don't even have to say it. In our buildings that are strongest in teaming, they would never consider hiring somebody who wasn't going to become a member of their team.
And during our shared principal meetings, we're giving principals multiple opportunities to share their successes with each other as well as their challenges. So we're also creating a learning community where success begets success, and they can start sharing some of their best practices with each other.
If I could add one more thing that just to add to the conversation a little bit, we're talking about language arts and math and the content areas of student achievement. One of the most interesting things about this teamwork and collective efficacy is that it comes extremely naturally to the non-academic subjects. They've been doing it all along. So if you teach something where art or performing arts or music, or you teach anything where a kid is creating a product, the kids evaluate their product against rubrics. They know exactly where they're getting better. The teachers are watching and helping them to use the formative process to see what piece do they have to, what skill do they build next time. And if you want to see formative assessment process, it happens every day in all of the classes that are non-academic and in content. It's really interesting because it's really given rise to those teachers in our system where they've been saying, we've been doing this all along. This is how we think. So it's been sort of an interesting phenomenon, I'd say, over the last 5-6 years as those teachers are having a stronger voice, I think, on staffs.
Carolyn.
So first, I just have a comment, and I wanted to say that I loved your comment about eliminating the predictability about how any subgroup will perform. That means a lot to me because I think it goes to our commitment to equity.
Yes.
And so I really like the work that you're doing around that, and I applaud you for that. And then this is kind of a process question. You put in here that you want to use feedback that's purposeful and descriptive, and my experience with that is when you're giving employees feedback, it oftentimes requires a lot of candor. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered how that is handled. I mean, are we talking about peer-to-peer? Are we talking about the facilitator? Or are we talking about the group giving feedback? And does the feedback come down to like the group or to individuals? I mean, if we have somebody in the group who's not performing well,
Mm-hmm.
how is that, how do we handle that? How is that candor done? And then I wanted to ask one question too about the dashboard. Ginger, you talked about the dashboard was 5 levels, and that's the 8th through 8th grade and up, is that correct? On the dashboard?
Yeah, actually, we're even able to put dibbles in, so we're able to go into the younger grades
Into
now,
the younger
too.
grades. So I was wondering, the tracking mechanism for elementary kids, and how does that connect to the dashboard if it's like 8th through 12th?
Yeah, it's-
So those were just my questions. So, yep.
Well, the dashboard is actually, we are able to put dibbles in. We're actually looking at some of the intervention programs that schools are using across the district, like STAR, and some of the other ones where they're actually tracking student progress in reading. And we're finding ways to put those kinds of scores into the dashboard as well, so that we can go down to the earlier grades, so we can go all the way through elementary, up to basically 10th, 11th grade when they take the SAT. So the great thing is then theoretically, if a student stayed in PSD, we'd be able to see that trajectory all the way through.
I'll take the question about feedback. It's mainly what's put on the slide there is about peer-to-peer. Keep in mind that trained facilitator will be a peer, won't be an administrator. The administrator will be a present. So what we watched happen, one of the nice things is we got to watch a team go from scratch last year, the 3rd grade team at Putnam, and how that developed. And once they build that relational trust, once they start to have a common aim and that teacher clarity, and then they look at results, they start to ask each other's questions like, how did you do better than I did? I noticed that I did this, and they start to compare, but it's safe. They have trust in each other, so that's why relational trust is that foundation for a high-impact team. But once you get to that point, we may look at that candor differently if we don't have that trust. What do you got against me? Are you trying to push me this way or make me look bad? But when you have that trust already established, critical feedback is exactly that. It's still aimed at the most important thing in the room, and that's the learner. And we watched the Putnam team go through this evolution as they compared results and looked at that and just kind of nurtured along the way. And by the time they got through that first impact team cycle, that trust was already taking hold. You could see it. You could hear them say, show me what you have. Can you share this with me? I didn't do as well as you did. Can you do that? When they get to start posing questions like that, they're open to the suggestions. And like Scott said, it can be a process. It can take a little while. We've got to, particularly for those who haven't experienced the joy of being in a productive team, and it truly can be very joyful. A lot of us have been in teams, maybe not just as teacher teams, but other teams, whether it's sports or whatever it may be, and it gets there. It takes a little time. When teams don't have that trust to start with, then the administrator and those that are supporting it, they've got to work at that. They've got to create those conditions where that trust can take place. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a difficult one at times. And a lot of times teachers don't want to, particularly ones that do well, want to gloat, right? Nate, why did you do this? How did you get better scores than I did? And then Nate sometimes can be a little apprehensive to share because it feels like he's gloating or bragging. But when you have a team together, we welcome Nate's suggestions because it makes all of us better.
Thanks. I really love hearing that. That's really nice. It's great to hear that those are the kinds of things that are going on.
You bet.
Because sometimes that doesn't work so well, right?
Yeah, I know.
It's great to hear. Thanks.
Board members, other questions, comments, thoughts? Rob?
So you can defer this to Dwayne if you want, but in looking at the slides you put up with the scores, and you asked us to look at variability, and there certainly is some variability there. But so there's some variability there. I suspect there would be more variability in the actual performance scores as opposed to the growth scores. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Possible.
And I guess the question I have is from the point of view of success in the system, right, is as opposed to an individual teacher now, because I understand individual teachers sort of get the students that they get, right? They don't get to choose, I get all the high performing students or I have all the low performing, they get whatever they get, and they've got to have them grow as much as they can possibly grow within a year. And so I acknowledge that. But as a system, we want all students to wind up performing at least adequately, right? At least at meeting expectations, right? If not above, right? And so the question I have is, from the point of view of measuring equity, variability in the system as a whole, should we be looking at performance or growth or both? And again, if you want to defer that to Dwayne, that's fine, but I think it's,
We don't need Dwayne to tell you,
No,
we
I
look
know.
at both.
We need to look at both.
okay,
Yeah,
and so,
gives you different views, right?
I guess I'd hope that would be the answer.
Growth often precedes achievement, though, right?
Of
You're going to see
course,
the growth
of course.
first, and then achievement will follow.
Of course, but at some level, to the extent that some of these subgroups or individual students, for that matter, are not performing as well as we would hope they would have performed, their growth has to be at a fairly steep
Steep
ramp,
ramp, yeah.
right?
Has to
And
be
so at some
accelerated.
level, a question about, looking at those things and thinking about variability, it's hard to know whether those students, those, for example, I noticed English language learners, for example, have above 50 in a lot of these categories in a lot of the grade levels, and I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's enough as a whole to get them to where they need to be, or maybe they're already where they need to be, because I haven't internalized the latest performance numbers. But as we consider this, I guess I'm surprised. Yeah, as we consider this, I hope we're considering performance too, and that
Absolutely.
as we have some of these conversations, we see
Yes.
both sets of data so we can understand
Yeah.
sort of year to year how we're doing, and as a
Right.
system, are we getting to where we need to be?
So
And
one of
even
the
with-
things,
Is that,
One of the things
is
I'd
that
say
fair?
that-
Is
yeah.
that fair?
one of the things I'd say that's exciting about the process is, so, Rob, we're talking about the end goal, the end data, when you talk about growth and performance. But one of the things that's exciting, and Putnam's a good example of, when you watch the conversation about today's data or what we did last week, and then you make modifications as a group around how can we be more impactful in the learning, and then we come back and talk about that, you see it in a short duration. So you start to feel the impact you're having over a week or a month's time, and you start to see, and all of it is against the grade level standard. So it's all looking at outcomes against a rigorous standard. And that's part of the process we're going through, is how do we make sure that the work we're asking kids to do is at that level, and all kids are asked to do that at that level. And if we start to see that we can achieve those outcomes in shorter bursts, then we have a better chance at the longer burst.
I think that you can't overemphasize having the grade level standard hold steady and actually
Yes.
putting work in front of kids that is at
Yeah.
grade level. And then seeing how they did and helping them to come back around and approach that task again so that eventually they can do that work. And that's part of what the team is trying to help each other do, is give kids grade level work
Yeah.
and see how they did and what scaffolds do they need to get there. Because it's super easy, I know I did it as a teacher, to be really excited about the growth of kids that you see every day, and you've lost sight of the fact that the grade level standard keeps on going up and up and up, and the kids never closing the gap. They're learning a lot. And if they have a lot of obstacles to learning, you're really being successful that they're learning, but they're still behind. So it takes both.
And as our teachers have done this, they've learned a lot about what they thought was a rigorous example of what an
Right.
expectation
That's
was.
huge.
And they realized it wasn't
Yeah.
quite to that level. So every time that goes down, that compounds each year, like Dr. Smizer's saying, you get farther and farther away from that example. Let's also not overlook student efficacy. Part of this work, if we put teacher-student relationships up there, is because we know the power of a student and a teacher relationship and a teacher's ability to instill confidence and a belief in a kid. And you can walk around this district and some of our places that are doing this work at a really high level, those students are so empowered. They see the importance that they have, and you can see them, watch these little 7 and 8-year-olds strut around the classroom with purpose and being able to say, I know right where I'm going and I know how to get there.
So I think that's all the questions I have at the minute anyway. I just wanted to say that, I mean, I appreciate the clarifications and amplifications that you made, Dr. Smizer, and what you guys are saying as well. And I want to be clear that the work that you presented here tonight sounds terrific. And I don't want you to take my questions in any other way than it's terrific, and let's make sure that everybody's having the benefit of some of this stuff. So thanks very much.
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Hey, I do have one question to follow up on what you said earlier. Did I hear you say, or did I hear it incorrectly, that you are or have or are going to put some of that connectedness survey stuff into the dashboard?
Yes.
Which-
Yes, we sure are. And actually,
Past
it's in the
tense, future
dashboard right
tense.
now.
Okay.
And actually, we're in the process of seeing how we can display the connectedness data alongside of the achievement data. So we'd have our, the buckets up above of the students and the different groups that they're in, along with the connectedness survey results, so that we can start pulling that data together to see the whole child, which is what we're after.
How cool is
Yeah,
that?
that's exciting.
Okay. Okay, Susan, okay.
Could you speak a little bit to you said that there were a group of schools, elementary schools, that were not part of the little Title I cadre, but still very excited about doing the work. And then at secondary level, Scott, you mentioned that there were some teams that were in progress too. Could you tell me how you're working with them while still keeping the focus on the Title I, just in terms of resources and availability of training and those things?
Yep. Great question, Susan. We did the same two-day training. I think you had a chance to come to Collins and see Todd's group doing that. We did the same training, 2 days, although Todd did it with Barb, the trainer, and then our PD department. We had Barb both days for secondary. It was an optional training, and quite frankly, when we went into it, I wasn't sure what the outcome would be. It was July 31st and August 1st. We had 75 secondary educators there, a team, at least a team, from 12 of our 17 buildings. So that was pretty exciting. The energy was great. And then as we move into the fall, we will be doing coaching supported by our PD department with math at Lincoln. So that'll be the first group out of the chute for us with the actual coaching model. We're excited about that, and they are too. And then we also, at the secondary level, will be doing some work around standards and taking a look at the standards in language arts as we move through the fall, and continuing to build opportunities for coaching later in the fall, early winter, and then ramping that up as second semester as elementary shifts to more support from the PD department. So we've kind of got it in waves. And then in addition, I would just say that as the three of us think about our collective elementary, secondary meetings, we will be reinforcing and helping to build the efficacy of our administrators supporting this work all the way through the year. So it hopefully is a systems approach.
We're also looking at the central office level of how we can create like professional development teams of folks that could actually go into schools and do some of that work alongside the high-performing teams or impact teams where principals are wanting some extra support, so that we can keep building that model of going into schools alongside teachers and principals in the actual work, as opposed to pulling people out to attend a training. So we're working on more of that kind of model too, to help support especially secondary schools as well as those elementary schools that aren't a part of that official Title I cohort.
Part of the thing that's super positive about the work that we've done, and it's a testament to Ginger's PD department. Barb, our consultant, has already given us an opportunity to take it and run with it. So she's almost trained us to do some of the work she's done, and that hasn't happened other places. And it's because we have quality people in that department that are already doing the work right alongside her, and she trusts us. So we've built some trust with her. That's exciting because it means we are building our own capacity and our own efficacy all the way through the system, and it's been pretty neat to see, and really it's happened in a hurry.
One more question probably for Scott, because I'm looking at the secondary level. describe, if you would, who jumped at the chance? I don't mean school-wise, but I'm just saying is it by discipline? Was it, how did the teams form? Who was interested? If we went to look at these
Yeah, that was an
this year?
interesting question, because when we began talking about doing the secondary training, we started by saying we were going to put a container. We were going to say you needed to bring one content team. And then we decided we'd open it up and say, look, you've been working with us on collective efficacy the last year. We'd like you to bring a team. We had one high school that came with just their admin team. So that's them just trying to dip their toes in, right, and figure out where are we. And we had schools, a middle school or a high school that brought their English cohort. We had middle schools that brought a grade level team. We had a middle school that brought all of their department leaders, so their leadership team. We had several that brought content teams. I already talked about Lincoln. Lincoln brought their whole math department. And so we had kind of the gamut. So as they started looking at which teams were ready to do the work in their buildings, that's who they brought. And that's positive, because that means they brought the people that are ready to do the work, ready to have some success, that will breed success in their building. So it turned out to be a mixture. And then when we went to Barb, she was excited about that. We were a little nervous, saying, Barb, we can't tell you we have all content teachers in front of you. And she's like, no, what you have is great. This is a great mixture. And it shows that your leaders are in tune with who they're bringing.
Which you said is the key to it. If the principal is involved, then it's the key to success for this to work.
Which
So,
is,
glad
yeah,
to
the
see
other
that.
thing that's exciting is every one of those teams, there was an administrator with them. So that was very exciting, I think.
That must have been very exciting for you. Excellent.
I want to add one more part real quick. One of the other promising facts, you interface with Carolyn in early childhood quite a bit. They are active participants in this work as well, and we have a commitment at a couple of schools where the early childhood team, the kindergarten team, and the first grade team are going to become impact teams and work in alignment together. Once that happens, that's going to be a pretty special part of that work, and Putnam's going to come out of the chute first because they've had so much training. Carissa, who is an early childhood educator at Putnam, is organizing that work, and along with the kindergarten team and first grade team. So we'll be eager at some point to share how that work is going, because that's even some new chartered ground for the impact team people across the country. They've not brought in the early childhood piece as much, but since our early childhood group is connected, we're a pre-K through 12 system, they want to jump in as well. They have standards so they can still do the same work, and so this year will be a really neat time to watch and see how they produce and what they get out of that.
Okay, Rob.
Okay, so I fabbed. I have one more question. If you had additional resources, how would you deploy them to magnify the success of this work? What would you do with it?
I would probably speed up the time we have with Barb. And Barb, it's resources, it's also her. She's booked, so she's doing this work all over the country. So, but bringing in support to do the work we need, we talked about just the last couple of days as a group of 3, what's our capacity internally to drive some of the work? And so when you bump up against your own capacity, you have to bring in extra capacity. So that's what I would say. That and being able to bring teachers together to do the work,
Yeah.
because their time is a challenge also. So those would be the 2 suggestions I would make.
I would say that the best resource is the one we already have, which is incredibly caring teachers who are committed to the work with the principals. I think the nice thing about this is that it's not a resource-heavy type of approach. It's something we all can do, every place, every grade, every kid. And that's a nice part of it. But yeah, I'm like Scott and Ginger. I'd love to accelerate the timeline, but I think our pace is pretty good right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments, thoughts? Anyone want to burst into song or anything? No? Okay. Let's go on then to agenda planning 7.0. Do any board members have anything they'd like to bring up for
Thank you
consideration?
all.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Nate?
Yes, this discussion was great, and looking forward, based on the last meeting, this meeting, and looking forward to the next meeting, it seems like it would be a good use of everyone's time if we had a couple of these kind of agenda items so that, you know, if we go till 11 o'clock, one meeting or another, that's fine, but, you know, it seems like we're kind of cutting short the ability to have input on different things by not scheduling enough on the agendas. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, well, so since the next topic is, let's go into 7.0 agenda planning, do people have things that they would like to bring up regarding agenda scheduling or agenda planning? So do you have specific recommendations, Nate?
Well, I'll make some suggestions after I dig through all my notes, but I was just saying in general, I mean, why wouldn't we schedule, maybe because it's not ready, but why wouldn't we schedule the thing that's scheduled for the 12th tonight so that we have room for, you know, a fuller meeting agenda for the 12th? It's just seems like it's a better use of everyone's time if we have more stuff on the agenda. So nothing specific, but I'll get back to you on that.
Well, I know that one of the conversations we've had a lot in the past has been, you know, how late these meetings go and trying to limit it so that we aren't all exhausted mentally and physically by the time we get to them. So that's sort of been part of what's going on, in addition to, you know, waiting for things to pop up in terms of the staff's ability to get them out. And also, I guess one of the things, just so you're aware, that's going on right now is that, what is it called? The federal audit that they're doing is a huge, huge, huge impact on staff, in addition to the charter school application that's causing them to do an awful lot of extra work in other areas that we don't necessarily see right off the bat. So just, and Sandra might be able to speak to some of that, but just, I know that's some of the thinking about some of the upfront beginning of the year stuff.
I was just thinking too, in terms of planning, that this item, did anybody notice what time we started this item? Because I thought that was a pretty good, long discussion, but was it more than an hour? Or just?
Hour 15.
Hour 15? So your point was we could have done one more, right? And maybe, depending on the topic or whatever. Yeah.
I think 9 or 9:30 is not unreasonable. So, you know, that, I mean, the last one we got out at, what, 10 till 8, and we're about, wasn't it?
Is it really?
Can I just tell you how many people were ecstatic last time that we got out at 10 to 8?
Well, yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate your response. It just seems a little defensive in terms of, you know, we don't have anything for the board to work on, or, and I understand that it's staffing the board takes a lot of time, and staff has a lot of other things to do. It's just, if we want to have board meetings that last until 8 or 8:30, that's fine, but it seems like that hasn't been the practice in the past, so I'm wondering why 3 meetings in a row it's going to be the case. So that was my point.
Okay.
So,
I mean, and if you have specific suggestions, I mean, more than happy to have them. A lot of the stuff I think we do have to wait on. But go ahead, Rob.
yeah, so, I mean, there are those kind of constraints, and you know, those doing agenda planning need to take into account all that stuff. So, and I think the idea of filling some of these earlier ones with more topics will allow us to have less later ones later if we can work out the timing. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the intent of what you were, part of the intent anyway, what you were saying, Nate, and I support that perspective as well.
Okay. Well, if people have specific suggestions, I mean, please do pass them
That's fair.
along
That's fair.
to agenda planning. A lot of times it is a matter of what staff can prepare, but there's always an opportunity, if it's just a board discussion thing that staff doesn't have to prepare for, that's certainly easier for us to put on the agenda at most any time. Carolyn, you look like you have something.
So I don't know if this is an agenda item or a question, but last year when we went to Community Connections and visited the school, I was really impressed with the program, and I think that they're doing great work there. I was a little concerned about how small their space was, and I knew that they were projecting they were going to have quite a few kids in there this year, and I know they're not all there all the time, But I was just interested in hearing about kind of how they're doing. Do they really have enough space, or are they really all crammed in there like my impression is that they are?
Sandra, would that be appropriate for
Is
a
that-
Friday update, a dinner session update, or
Or
an
just maybe,
informational
yeah,
item?
maybe Sarah can come and tell us if she feels like she has enough. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you have something, Christoph? Okay.
Not a dinner session, but information.
Okay. That's a good suggestion. Anybody else? Other topics, thoughts? If you guys do come up with stuff that you think of, feel free to contact us. Okay. Anything else on agenda planning? Okay, 8.0, that brings us to adjournment. Thank you, everybody else. It is 8:20 p.m., and I think we had a good conversation tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.